Commander Vex of the Galactic Council's elite diplomatic corps had seen some weird stuff in his 47 years of service. He'd negotiated peace treaties with sentient gas clouds, mediated disputes between hive minds that communicated through interpretive dance, and once spent 3 months trying to explain the concept of personal space to a species that reproduced by friendly hugging. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this. "Sir," whispered Dr. Krill, his voice crackling through the comm unit with barely contained panic, "the humans have gathered their offspring in a circle of death." Vex peered through his binoculars at the clearing below, where a family of the galaxy's most notorious apex predators had apparently decided to conduct some sort of ritualistic child sacrifice. At least, that's what it looked like according to every piece of intelligence they'd gathered from intercepted Earth broadcasts. The Galactic Council had spent years analyzing human nature documentaries, and the consensus was clear. Humans were terrifying killing machines who dominated their planet through sheer brutality and cunning. And yet here they were, watching a male human specimens designated as the most aggressive of the species, gently helping 2 small cubs arrange combustible materials in a perfect circle. The female human, supposedly the craftier and more dangerous variant according to their research, was unpacking what appeared to be sustenance supplies while humming some sort of hypnotic battle hymn. "This doesn't match our projections," muttered Lieutenant Zapp, the team's military advisor, who was currently having what could only be described as a nervous breakdown behind a pine tree. "Our intelligence suggested humans kept their young in fortified structures, not this." The fire sparked to life, casting dancing shadows across the small human faces. The cubs, if you could call them that when they were clearly being trained as future apex predators, squealed with what the aliens could only interpret as bloodthirsty delight. "By the 7 moons of Proxima," breathed Dr. Krill, frantically taking readings with his bioscanner. "The adult specimens are deliberately exposing their genetic investment to open flame. This is either advanced psychological conditioning or the most elaborate form of population control I've ever witnessed." Commander Vex adjusted his tactical visor and tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The male human, Tom, according to their intercepted communication signals, was now producing cylindrical white objects from a bag and impaling them on pointed sticks. The female, Lisa, was breaking apart brown rectangular substances with her bare hands, showing the kind of casual violence that had made humans the stuff of galactic nightmares. "Should we intervene, sir?" asked Lieutenant Zapp, his mandibles clicking nervously. "Prime Directive says we're not supposed to interfere with primitive species, but this looks like it might qualify as a humanitarian crisis." Vex considered this. The Galactic Council had sent them to establish first contact with humanity, but their briefing had focused on approaching the species as dangerous but potentially valuable allies. Nobody had mentioned anything about child endangerment rituals conducted around open flames in the wilderness. "Negative," Vex decided, though his stomach churns with uncertainty. "We observe first, document everything. If humans are truly as adaptable as our intelligence suggests, there might be a method to this madness." Below them, the human cubs began chanting something that sounded suspiciously like a war cry. "S'mores! S'mores! We want s'mores!" The adults responded by placing the impaled white objects directly into the flames, where they began to transform into golden-brown masses of what could only be described as controlled destruction. Dr. Krill's scanner beeped frantically. "Sir, I'm detecting elevated stress hormones in all specimens, but also pleasure chemicals? This is unprecedented. They're simultaneously terrified and enjoying themselves." "Classic human psychology," Vex said grimly, though privately he was starting to question everything the Galactic Council thought they knew about Earth's dominant species. Fear and pleasure combined into a single response. It's exactly the kind of psychological conditioning that made them masters of their world. As the fire crackled higher and the human cubs moved closer to the flames instead of running away like any sensible species would, Commander Vex realized that their first contact mission had just become infinitely more complicated. This wasn't going to be the straightforward diplomatic meeting they'd planned for. This was going to be an anthropological nightmare. "We need a full behavioral analysis before we make contact," Dr. Krill announced, setting up his portable laboratory behind a cluster of ferns that he was convinced provided adequate camouflage. "If we're going to save those cubs, we need to understand the pack dynamics first." Commander Vex wasn't entirely convinced they needed saving anymore, but he'd learned to trust his science officer's paranoia over the years. It had kept them alive during the infamous blob negotiations of Sector 7. "Fine, full surveillance protocol, but we maintain radio silence with command until we know what we're dealing with." Lieutenant Zapp was busy assembling what appeared to be enough monitoring equipment to spy on a small moon. I've got thermal imaging, electromagnetic spectrum analysis, and pheromone detectors online. If these humans so much as twitch wrong, we'll know about it. Below them, the human family had moved into what Dr. Krill was documenting as Phase 2 of the ritual. Tom was now telling what could only be described as psychological warfare stories, involving something called a hookman, who apparently terrorized young humans in vehicles. The cubs listened with rapt attention, occasionally gasping or giggling, which the aliens interpreted as either terror responses or anticipatory bloodlust. Note the conditioning methodology, Dr. Krill whispered into his recorder. The adult male appears to be desensitizing the offspring to violence through narrative exposure, classic predator training techniques. Lisa, meanwhile, had begun distributing small sharp implements to each family member. The aliens watched in horror as she handed actual metal points to the cubs, who immediately began stabbing them into the mysterious white cylindrical objects with disturbing enthusiasm. "Dear Cosmic Void," breathed Lieutenant Zapp. "They're teaching weapon handling to juveniles? How young do they start the combat training?" Emma, age 7 and completely unaware she was being classified as a junior warrior, managed to set her marshmallow on fire and began waving it around like a tiny torch. Her brother Jake laughed and did the same, creating what the aliens perceived as an impromptu fire dancing display. "They're demonstrating flame manipulation techniques," Dr. Krill noted, his voice getting higher with each observation. "The smaller cub appears to have advanced pyrotechnic skills despite her diminutive size." Commander Vex was beginning to suspect that their intelligence briefings might have been slightly off base. The human behaviors were certainly strange, but they seemed more recreational than murderous. Still, he'd been wrong before, and the cost of underestimating an apex predator species was usually measured in missing limbs. "Sir," Lieutenant Zapp reported, checking his instruments, "I'm picking up elevated vocal frequencies from the adult specimens. They appear to be entering some sort of trance state." Indeed, Tom and Lisa had begun harmonizing in what could only be described as ritualistic chanting. "Kumbaya, my lord, kumbaya!" The cubs joined in, their small voices adding to what the aliens perceived as an ancient war song passed down through generations of human hunters. "It's clearly a bonding ritual," Dr. Krill concluded, frantically scribbling notes. "They're strengthening pack loyalty before the night hunt begins." But as the evening progressed and no actual hunting commenced, the aliens began to notice something odd. Instead of sharpening weapons or discussing tactical strategies, the humans were roasting more of those white objects, assembling them into complex layered structures with the brown rectangular substances, and consuming them with obvious pleasure. "Wait," Commander Vex said slowly, a terrible realization beginning to dawn. "What if we got this completely wrong?" Lieutenant Zapp looked up from his scanner readouts. "Wrong how, sir?" "What if this isn't a training exercise at all? What if this is just what they do for fun?" The three aliens stared at each other in mounting horror. Because if humans did this for entertainment, what did they do when they were actually trying to be scary? The answer to that question came sooner than expected. "New development," Lieutenant Zapp hissed, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "The adult male has initiated what appears to be a dispersal protocol." Commander Vex swiveled his binoculars toward the campfire circle, where Tom was indeed standing up and stretching. "All right, family, who wants to play some night tag before we turn in?" The cubs erupted in enthusiastic cheers that the aliens immediately classified as battle cries. Emma bounced up and down with the kind of manic energy that suggested she was either having a sugar rush or entering a berserker state. Jake was already scanning the tree line with the focused intensity of a trained scout. "By the rings of Saturn," Dr. Krill whispered, his scanner going haywire. "They're initiating nocturnal combat training. The adult specimens are about to release the cubs into a hostile environment for survival testing." "This is it," Lieutenant Zapp said grimly, checking his emergency beacon. "This is how they forge their young into apex predators. Natural selection through terror." The rules of the game, as explained by Tom, were simple enough to understand but horrifying in their implications. One human would be designated as it and would hunt the others through the dark forest. When caught, a new hunter would be chosen, ensuring that every member of the pack learned both predator and prey behaviors. "Brilliant," Commander Vex admitted grudgingly. "Absolutely terrifying, but brilliant. They're training pack coordination, stealth techniques, and pursuit algorithms simultaneously." Lisa was designated as the first hunter, which caused Dr. Krill to nearly faint. According to their intelligence, human females were the more dangerous of the species, using cunning and psychological manipulation to achieve their goals. Watching her count to 30 while the cubs scattered into the darkness like tiny ghosts was like witnessing a masterclass in predatory behavior. "Track their movement patterns," Vex ordered, though he was finding it surprisingly difficult to keep up with the small humans. For creatures that had seemed so harmless around the campfire, they moved through the forest with unsettling efficiency. Jake had immediately climbed a tree, demonstrating the kind of arboreal adaptability that made humans so dangerous. Emma had found a fallen log to hide behind, showing an innate understanding of camouflage and concealment. These weren't just cubs playing games. These were junior apex predators honing their skills. "Movement in Sector 3, Lieutenant Zapp reported. "The female hunter is using a stalking pattern I've never seen before. She's actually making noise deliberately, driving the cubs toward— Oh no." "What?" both Vex and Krill demanded simultaneously. "She's hurting them. Using psychological pressure to force movement rather than relying on speed. The cubs think they're evading, but they're actually being maneuvered into predetermined positions." Sure enough, Lisa had somehow managed to corner Jake near a large boulder, tagging him with the casual efficiency of someone who had clearly done this many times before. The transition was seamless. Jake became the hunter, and Lisa melted back into the darkness like she'd never been there at all. But then disaster struck. Emma, in her excitement to evade her brother's pursuit, caught her foot on a root and went tumbling into a patch of undergrowth. The aliens heard the impact, followed by a small cry of pain that sent chills down their collective spines. "Cub down," Dr. Krill reported, his voice cracking. "Repeat, we have a wounded cub." Commander Vex prepared for the worst. Every piece of intelligence they had suggested that humans abandoned weak pack members without hesitation. It was supposedly one of their most ruthless characteristics, the willingness to sacrifice individuals for the good of the group. But instead of leaving Emma behind, the entire family immediately converged on her location. Tom knelt beside his daughter, gently examining her scraped knee, while Lisa produced what appeared to be a portable medical kit from seemingly nowhere. Jake hovered anxiously nearby, asking if his sister was okay. "This doesn't make sense," Dr. Krill muttered, frantically checking his readings. "She's injured. She's slowing down the pack. Why aren't they abandoning her?" Tom cleaned Emma's scrape with something that made her wince, then applied a small adhesive bandage decorated with cartoon characters. But the most baffling part came next. He kissed the bandage, and Lisa followed suit, while Jake offered his sister a piece of chocolate from his pocket. "Inefficient pack behavior," Lieutenant Zapp concluded, though he sounded more confused than convinced. Unless this is some sort of advanced psychological conditioning we don't understand." Commander Vex lowered his binoculars and stared at his subordinates. "Or," he said slowly, "maybe we don't understand humans at all." The game resumed after Emma declared herself fit for duty, but the aliens were no longer watching with the same clinical detachment. Something about the way the humans cared for their wounded had shaken their fundamental assumptions about Earth's dominant species. Commander Vex had faced down hostile armadas, negotiated with beings that could dissolve matter with their thoughts, and once successfully talked a sentient black hole out of consuming a solar system. But standing at the edge of a human campfire circle, wearing his formal diplomatic uniform and holding a universal translator that kept making concerning beeping sounds, he had never felt more out of his element. "Remember the protocol," he whispered to his team through their comm units. "We approach as peaceful representatives of the Galactic Council. We establish communication. We assess the situation regarding the endangered offspring. And under no circumstances do we mention that we've been watching them for the past 3 hours." Dr. Krill adjusted his ceremonial science sash and checked his bioscanner one final time. "Sir, I'm still getting contradictory readings from the human specimens. Their behavior patterns don't match any of our projections." "Just stick to the script," Lieutenant Zapp muttered, his hand hovering near his emergency beacon. "Diplomatic contact, offspring safety assessment, cultural exchange protocols. Simple." None of them felt particularly simple as they stepped into the firelight. Tom looked up from where he was helping Jake arrange kindling for the dying fire, and his first reaction was not the territorial aggression they had expected from an apex predator protecting his young. Instead, he smiled, with the kind of genuine warmth that their xenopsychology training had completely failed to prepare them for. "Oh, hey there," Tom said, standing up and brushing dirt off his hands. "You folks okay? You look a little lost." Commander Vex activated his universal translator, which immediately began spouting the formal diplomatic greeting he had memorized during their 3-month journey to Earth. "Greetings, human specimens. We are representatives of the Galactic Council of Sentient Species. here to establish peaceful first contact with your civilization and assess the welfare of your developing offspring in this clearly hazardous environment. The translator, which had been tested on 47 different species and had never failed, chose this moment to malfunction spectacularly. What came out was a series of electronic warbles, followed by what sounded like a formal declaration of war against camping equipment. Tom blinked. Sorry, what? Lisa approached from the tent, where she had been settling the kids down for the night, and took in the sight of three clearly non-human beings standing awkwardly at the edge of their campsite. To her credit, her first instinct was not to scream, or run, or reach for anything weapon-like. Instead, she looked them up and down and said, "Are you guys with the Renaissance Fair? Because if so, your costumes are absolutely incredible." Dr. Krill panicked. This was not covered in any of their training scenarios. "We are not associated with any Renaissance festivities," he said through his own translator, which was working slightly better but still managed to insert random technical jargon into every sentence. "We are here to conduct a welfare assessment of your genetic legacy units and provide relocation services to a safer dimensional habitat if necessary." "You're what now?" Tom asked, glancing at his wife with the kind of look that suggested they were both wondering if these were the eccentric neighbors they had heard rumors about. Commander Vex realized they were losing control of the situation rapidly. He tried a different approach. "Your cubs," he said carefully, pointing toward the tent where Jake and Emma were now peeking out, with the wide-eyed curiosity that their species database had classified as pre-attack reconnaissance behavior. "Your small humans. We observed their exposure to combustible materials and nocturnal predator training, and we are concerned for their safety." Tom followed Vex's gesture, and then looked back at the aliens with growing confusion. "You mean my kids? Jake and Emma? They're fine, we're just camping." "Camping," Dr. Krill repeated slowly, as if the word were in a foreign language. Which, technically it was. "This is... camping." "Yeah," Lisa said, her voice taking on the patient tone she usually reserved for explaining obvious things to relatives. "You know, sleeping outdoors, making s'mores, telling ghost stories, playing games. Family bonding time." Lieutenant Zapp's scanner chose this moment to start beeping frantically. "Sir, I'm detecting elevated stress hormones from all human specimens. They may be preparing for defensive action." What he was actually detecting was the family's growing concern that they were dealing with people who might not be entirely stable. Tom stepped slightly in front of his wife and kids, not in an aggressive way, but in the protective stance of a parent who was starting to wonder if he needed to be worried about these strange visitors. "Look," Tom said gently, "I don't know what you folks are talking about with all this genetic legacy and relocation stuff, but my family is perfectly safe. We're experienced campers. The fire is contained, the kids know the safety rules, and we're all having a great time." Commander Vex stared at him. "You are having a great time." "Well, yeah, that's kind of the point of camping." Dr. Krill frantically consulted his cultural database, cross-referencing camping with recreational activities and family bonding. The results that came back made his antennae twitch with confusion. "Sir," he whispered to Vex, "according to our linguistic analysis, this human is claiming that everything we observed was done for enjoyment purposes." "That can't be right," Lieutenant Zapp muttered. "No apex predator species engages in dangerous behavior purely for pleasure. There has to be an evolutionary advantage." But as they stood there in the flickering firelight, watching Jake emerge from the tent to offer them leftover s'mores and Emma shyly wave at them from behind her mother's legs, a terrible possibility began to dawn on all three aliens simultaneously. What if humans really were exactly what they appeared to be? What if all their intelligence was wrong? What if Earth's most dangerous species was actually just a family enjoying the outdoors together? The thought was almost more terrifying than their original assumptions. Elisa, bless her heart, had apparently decided that the three bizarre visitors were harmless, if eccentric fellow outdoor enthusiasts who had gotten a bit too deep into their role-playing hobby. "You know what?" she said, clapping her hands together in the universal gesture of maternal problem-solving. "Why don't you join us? There's plenty of room around the fire, and you look like you could use some hot chocolate." Commander Vex felt his world tilt on its axis. The apex predator was inviting them to join what they now understood might actually be a recreational gathering rather than a military training exercise. "That is most generous," he managed, his translator finally cooperating enough to produce something resembling normal speech. "But surely this violates your territorial protocols. Dr. Krill added anxiously, consulting his scanner as if it might provide some guidance for this unprecedented situation. "We are foreign entities entering your established perimeter during a family bonding ritual." Tom laughed, which caused all three aliens to flinch reflexively. "Dude, it's just a campfire. The more the merrier. Besides, you guys seem like you could use some relaxation." Lieutenant Zapp was frantically taking readings as they approached the fire circle. "Sir, the ambient temperature around the combustion source is significantly elevated. Are we certain this is safe?" "It's a fire, Zapp," Commander Vex said wearily. "Humans apparently sit around them for fun." Jake, age 9 and completely unburdened by any awareness that he was supposedly a junior killing machine, immediately appointed himself as the aliens' cultural ambassador. "Are you guys from another country? Your clothes are really cool. Is that real metal?" He was pointing at Dr. Krill's bioscanner, which the scientist had been trying to disguise as some sort of camping equipment. "This is a specialized atmospheric measurement device," Krill explained carefully. "Like a weather thingy," Emma piped up, having overcome her initial shyness with the lightning speed that only 7-year-olds could manage. "My dad has one of those on his phone. It's considerably more advanced than—" "Can it tell if it's going to rain tomorrow?" Jake interrupted. Dr. Krill stared down at his quantum bioscanner, a device capable of analyzing the molecular structure of alien atmospheres and detecting life signs from orbit. Yes, technically it can predict meteorological patterns." "Cool. Dad, these guys have a super weather machine." Tom chuckled as he handed the aliens steaming mugs of hot chocolate, apparently completely unfazed by their strange appearance or their earlier bizarre introduction. "Sorry about the kids. They're at the age where everything is fascinating." Commander Vex accepted his mug with the same caution he might use when handling unstable antimatter. The liquid inside was brown and emitted aromatic compounds that his olfactory sensors couldn't quite classify. "What is the purpose of this beverage?" "It's hot chocolate," Lisa explained, settling down on a log and patting the space beside her in invitation. "It's sweet, it's warm, and it makes everything better. Trust me." Lieutenant Zapp took a tentative sip and his entire sensory array lit up like a festival display. "By the moons of Zarquan," he breathed. "This contains psychoactive compounds." "That's the sugar and caffeine," Tom said cheerfully. "Kids love it." "You provide stimulants to your offspring?" Dr. Krill asked, his voice rising with renewed alarm. "Dad," Emma said, tugging on Tom's sleeve with the persistence of a small person on a mission, "can we make s'mores for our new friends?" And that was how Commander Vex, veteran of 47 first contact missions, found himself being patiently instructed in the ancient human art of marshmallow roasting by a 7-year-old who kept correcting his technique. No, you're holding it too close," Emma explained with the infinite patience of a child teaching a particularly slow adult. "You want to turn it slowly so it gets golden all over, like this?" Her demonstration marshmallow was indeed achieving a perfect golden brown coloration through careful rotation over the flames. Vex's marshmallow had caught fire twice and was now more charcoal than food product. "The combustion dynamics are more complex than anticipated," he admitted to Dr. Krill, who was having his own struggles with the roasting process. Meanwhile, Jake had apparently decided that Lieutenant Zapp needed intensive education in human recreational activities. "So, after you get the marshmallow perfect, you squish it between the chocolate and the graham crackers, but you have to do it fast while it's still hot so the chocolate melts." Lieutenant Zapp, who had once calculated hyperspace trajectories for an entire battle fleet while under enemy fire, found himself completely defeated by the engineering challenges of s'more construction. "The structural integrity is insufficient," he complained as his creation collapsed into a gooey mess. "The chocolate-to-marshmallow ratio appears unstable." "Here, let me help," Jake said, and with the casual efficiency of someone who had been making s'mores since he could hold a stick, he assembled a perfect example and handed it to the baffled alien. Zapp took a bite. His mandibles stopped clicking, his scanner readings stabilized, and for the first time since they'd landed on Earth, he made a sound that could only be described as a contented sigh. "This is," he paused, searching for the right words in Standard Galactic, "actually quite pleasant." Emma clapped her hands with delight. "He likes it, Dad. They like s'mores." But the real cultural breakthrough came when Lisa suggested they sing camp songs. Dr. Krill, whose species communicated partially through harmonic resonance, found himself unexpectedly moved by "Row, row, row your boat." His translator kept trying to analyze the lyrics for hidden meanings, producing increasingly confused readouts about boats rowing and the philosophical implications of life being a dream. "It's not supposed to make logical sense," Lisa explained gently when she noticed his confusion. It's just fun to sing together. Fun, Dr. Krill repeated slowly, as if testing the word. You engage in activities that serve no survival purpose and provide no tactical advantage, purely for fun. Welcome to being human, Tom said with a grin, raising his hot chocolate mug in a mock toast. Commander Vex looked around the fire circle, taking in the scene. Lieutenant Zapp was now successfully roasting his third marshmallow, while Jake offered encouragement. Dr. Krill was attempting to harmonize with Emma's rendition of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, with results that were both scientifically fascinating and musically questionable. And Lisa was already preparing more hot chocolate, because apparently feeding people was just something humans did automatically. Sir, Lieutenant Zapp said quietly during a lull in the singing, I think our intelligence briefing might have been incomplete. Commander Vex nodded slowly, watching Emma braid small wildflowers into what she insisted on calling Dr. Krill's antenna hair, causing the scientist's bio-readings to fluctuate wildly as his sensory organs were overwhelmed by the unexpected tactile input. Zap, he said finally, I think our intelligence briefing was completely wrong. 3 hours later, Commander Vex found himself in the unprecedented position of trying to explain to his superiors how a routine first contact mission had turned into what could only be described as an intergalactic sleepover. Let me see if I understand this correctly, he muttered into his comm unit, keeping his voice low so as not to wake the humans who had somehow convinced his entire diplomatic team to spend the night in something called a tent. We came here expecting to meet the galaxy's most dangerous apex predators, and instead we discovered they're just nice. Dr. Krill, who was lying in a sleeping bag designed for creatures half his size and loving every minute of it, had spent the last hour updating his cultural analysis reports. Sir, I've run 17 different behavioral models, and they all point to the same conclusion. Humans aren't actually apex predators in the traditional sense. They're apex friends. That's not a real classification, Krill. It is now. I'm proposing it to the Xenobiology Committee as soon as we get back. The evening had continued to deteriorate their preconceptions at an alarming rate. After the s'mores tutorial, Tom had produced something called beer from a mysterious cooling container and offered it to the aliens with the casual generosity of someone sharing water in a desert. Lieutenant Zapp, whose species had a 3-chambered digestive system, had discovered that human alcohol affected him in unexpected ways, leading to what could only be described as the first recorded case of an alien getting tipsy around a campfire and attempting to teach human children how to identify constellation patterns that didn't exist in Earth's sky. The big spinny one there, Zapp had explained with tremendous authority, gesturing vaguely at the Big Dipper. That's the cosmic turnip, very important for navigation, and that bright one is the star of infinite confusion, which is where lost space travelers go to contemplate their life choices. Jake and Emma had listened with rapt attention, completely convinced they were receiving advanced astronomical education from a real expert. Tom and Lisa had exchanged amused glances, but didn't correct him, apparently deciding that creative constellation names were harmless enough. The real revelation had come when Emma fell asleep against Dr. Krill's side while he was explaining the theoretical applications of quantum bioscanning to Lisa, who had listened with the polite attention of someone who understood approximately none of it, but appreciated the enthusiasm. The moment the small human had settled against him, trustingly using his thoracic section as a pillow, something in Dr. Krill's fundamental understanding of the universe had shifted. She's not afraid of us, he had whispered to Commander Vex with something approaching wonder. We're strange alien beings who appeared out of nowhere speaking nonsense about relocating her to safer dimensions, and she's using me as furniture. Human cubs apparently have no survival instincts whatsoever, Vex had replied, but his tone lacked conviction, because the more he watched this family, the more he realized that their lack of survival instincts was actually something else entirely. It was trust. It was the kind of open, generous assumption that strangers meant no harm unless proven otherwise. It was, frankly, the most terrifying thing he had ever encountered. By the time they had all squeezed into the oversized family tent that Tom insisted could accommodate everyone, Commander Vex had completely abandoned any pretense of maintaining professional distance. Jake had somehow convinced him to participate in something called ghost stories, which involved making dramatic voices while describing supernatural entities that didn't actually exist, but were apparently entertaining to contemplate. And then, Vex found himself saying, gesturing dramatically in the dim tent light, the ghost of bureaucratic inefficiency haunted the space station, causing all the paperwork to be filed in triplicate for all eternity. The kids giggled appreciatively, even though they clearly didn't understand half the words he was using. Lieutenant Zapp contributed a tale about the dreaded phantom of expired food rations, while Dr. Krill shared a scientifically accurate but thoroughly spooky story about black holes that somehow became both educational and genuinely creepy. Now, lying in the darkness and listening to the gentle breathing of sleeping humans, Commander Vex was trying to figure out how to write a report that wouldn't get his entire team reassigned to asteroid mining duty. "Sir," Lieutenant Zapp whispered, "what are we going to tell Command?" "The truth," Vex decided. "That humans are exactly as dangerous as we thought, just not in any way we expected." "How do you mean?" Commander Vex thought about Emma using him as a pillow, about Jake teaching Lieutenant Zapp constellation names that didn't exist, about Tom and Lisa welcoming 3 complete strangers into their family circle without hesitation. "They're dangerous because they make you want to protect them," he said finally. "They're apex predators who have weaponized hospitality. They turn enemies into friends simply by assuming that's what everyone wants to be." Dr. Krill shifted in his sleeping bag, careful not to disturb Emma, who had somehow migrated over to use his leg as a secondary pillow. "It's completely illogical from an evolutionary standpoint," he murmured, "and absolutely terrifying from a strategic one." "Exactly," Commander Vex agreed. "Any species that can survive and thrive while maintaining this level of trust and openness has to be incredibly dangerous underneath it all. They just hide it really, really well." Outside the tent, the campfire had burned down to gentle embers, casting soft light through the fabric walls. Tom had banked it properly before turning in, showing the kind of casual competence with potentially deadly forces that had originally convinced the aliens they were watching trained killers. "Tomorrow," Commander Vex decided, "we help them pack up their camp, we thank them for their hospitality, and we return to the ship. And then we recommend that the Galactic Council approach humanity very, very carefully." "Because they're dangerous?" Lieutenant Zapp asked. "Because they're not," Vex replied. "And that might be the most dangerous thing of all." As dawn broke over the campsite, Tom was already up making coffee with the kind of efficient morning routine that spoke of years of family camping experience. He quietly offered the aliens cups of the steaming dark liquid, somehow having figured out that their sleep cycles were different from humans and they might appreciate an early start to the day. "Thank you for letting us crash your camping trip," Commander Vex said, accepting the coffee and marveling at how the simple gesture felt both ordinary and profound. "Any time," Tom replied with genuine warmth. "You guys are welcome back whenever you want. Emma's already asking if you'll be here next weekend." As their ship lifted off later that morning, Commander Vex watched the human family waving goodbye from their campsite below. His report to the Galactic Council would be the shortest and most confusing first contact summary in diplomatic history. "Humans confirmed as galaxy's most dangerous species. Recommend immediate diplomatic alliance. Reason: they make excellent hot chocolate and will probably adopt us if we're not careful. Also, request permission to return next weekend. For research purposes, of course." Dr. Krill was already planning his presentation to the Xenobiology Committee on the revolutionary concept of apex friendship, while Lieutenant Zapp was quietly practicing the constellation names Jake had taught him, just in case they were real somewhere in the galaxy. After all, humans had been wrong about a lot of things, but they'd been absolutely right about one thing: s'mores really did make everything better.